Alright, I'm going to kind of show you what I mean by doing the zoned terrain here. I'm going to use paint, paint. But what you're familiar with is using WED, the world editor for the 3D Game Studio engine. That's where I started, but I found out that WED only goes to like a certain size, and you can't really expand from there unless you make like a multiple level type of scenario. So what I've been working on, it took me about a year to kind of figure it all out and get it right, is to create like a zone type of system where when I go to create the initial game, I just go into WED, create the initial files, but don't add anything into the WED editor. And once I have my compiled world, I just work with the script editor, and I manually load in the HMP files or the terrain files, and I line them all up to get more detail in the world. The thing is, I have noticed that when using an HMP file or a terrain file with the MED or the model editor, you cannot exceed 64,000 faces on the terrain, or else when you go to import it into the engine, it doesn't accept it. So what I've learned is you got to watch the size of your terrain. So each polygon on the terrain, it's a one-sided type of face, or like a plane. The other side you can see through. I'm sure you're familiar with, the models. When you make a plane, one side you can see the texture, the other side, if you were to look through it, it looks like you're not seeing anything. You just see right through it. So this is going to save us some polygons here. The top face, like I said, each face is going to consist of each polygon is going to consist of two faces for like each section of terrain. And what I mean by that is if like this is part of the terrain, and we'll just say that we have the vertices in each corner of this terrain. Let's say a vertex here. Let me make that bigger. Vertex here, vertex here, vertex here, here, and here. We think that this is going to be two faces, when in fact it's not. It's actually going to be split like this, and now we have four faces. So what I do with the terrain is I go and create a height map using the PNP Terrain Creator. That allows us to have a nice terrain that we can edit in a different program. And PNP Terrain Creator, when using like massive terrains or massive worlds, it's the only one that really allows you to line up the exported height map files. So if you want more detail, well, let's just step back a second. If you want a terrain, you can export a height map from the PNP Terrain Creator as a single large terrain in the sector. The problem with this is that if you have 100 or 150 quants going this way, going this way, and you have 100 quants going this way, that's 100 times 100 times 2. Excuse me. And real quick on the calculator, if I could find my calculator. Let's see here. Yeah, on a calculator, if we do that, it's going to come up with 100 times 100 times 2, approximately 20,000 faces. So we're still under the 64,000 mark, which is good. However, if you try to stretch this out, the terrain just looks too choppy. There's not much detail in it. And since we're trying to follow up some terraforming on the game, we're going to need something that has some detail, or else you're going to be terraforming a large portion of the terrain, which is it's not going to look right, nor the gameplay is going to look right, and it's just going to go downhill. So anyway, what I do is I go in the PN3 Terrain Creator and I create a certain zone or a sector. I do 6x6. This is one of the 6 quadrants, or actually one of the 36 quadrants. And then from there, when I export it, I don't export it as a 1024 type of bitmap for the height map because it's the whole entire sector. So what I do is I break it down to 64. If you were to go down to the PNP Terrain Creator, I'll show you what I mean here. Alright, I'll open up what I've been working on here for this new world. But anyway, excuse me. Alright, so here's what I mean. This quadrant down here is the one I've been working on, but here's for future expansion. Now, when I click on this quadrant, I can go to export. If I export this thing as a height map, bitmap, we don't want to export it as an HMP file because for some reason it just doesn't load right into the game engine. So export it as a bitmap, press OK, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. If you export as a 1024, this whole entire quadrant is going to be a single height map file, which is going to give us very little detail. So in the current version I'm running here, I used the 128 export, which gives me a total of 8 by 8 sections with a total of 64 zones when I export this. And as that is exported, I go in and I go into Med, and every little model there, HMP file, I add textures and add the multi-textured effects file, and then I can import it into 3D Game Studio, stretch it out accordingly, and then line all of the quadrants up side by side. That takes some time, but it's well worth it because then you have a nice looking terrain. Since we're going to be doing something even bigger here and we have the team, I'm now going to break it down to 64 sections. So instead of 8 across and 8 up, I'm going to have 16 across and 16 up, giving us a total of 255 zones in one sector. So it's going to be approximately 4 times larger than what I have now in the current game. But from here, then later on down the line, I can export, say, this sector or this sector or this sector to kind of make the world even bigger. And then we're going to break this down, each sector, into zones. So we'll be like, Sector 1 is the initial world, and as the world expands, we can easily add on the other parts of the world. And I might even keep on going here to just keep on adding the terrain to be much larger. It's the only method I know that works to give you a nice, large terrain. Wed's not going to cut it, so you have to do it through script. So if you were to go and export this, which I did last night, I believe, and I'll check here. Let's see here. Open up my terrain, my rendered height map. Oh, wait, no, I didn't. But this is where I export it, and I'm actually going to have 255 files in here, all height map, and then my texture map, at least for painting the texture, I'm going to have 255 files there. So I'm going to have to put this together in Med to make the actual world. So my method here to make this zoned terrain is to avoid using WED to create everything, and I'm going to break everything down to like a zone type of system. So here's what I do. So let's say we're starting to work with one of the 255 zones. What I do is I import the bitmap height map into Med, and it's going to come up as, say, like a terrain, a single zone terrain. I'm going to add, for the top, it's going to be a 100 quants. And as we're doing this, let me show you what I mean here. Go to Med. Alright, so for example, if I wanted to import this here, it's, I gotta go back to PNP Terrain Creator. Yeah, I should have done this before, but. Okay, so what we have. Right click this down. Oh, we don't want to go to edit. Okay, we go to export. Export the height map. And we're going to do 64 sections. Make sure the size plus 1 is not selected, and you don't have to flip the Y on this one. Size plus 1 is not going to make it a power of 2, and if it's not a power of 2, then it's not going to work correctly. Power of 2, of course, is 64 by 64, 128 by 128, 256 by 256, and so on and so forth. So we'll export this, and we're going to go into that folder I just showed you under the desktop terrain rendered under height maps. I'm going to name it 0, and then let's just save that. Now this just exported 255 files. I'm going to show you here. I'm going to close this. Let's open up this folder, show you under rendered height maps, and here's where we have 255 files. And if we just select all, you'll see here 256. I'm not sure where the other one came. Yeah, 256 is right. This is 256 by 256. All right. So anyway, with this now, I can go into my Med program, get a file. I can go to import terrain from image. Excuse me. Go to desktop. Go to terrain. Then go to rendered height map, and then I'm going to start with the first initial zone. This is going to be our first zone, and what I mean by vertices and the quants here is that in order for me to figure out how closely I have to import each zone into the 3D Game Studio engine, it's just a little calculation here. So for the ones I've been using, for the variables, I've been making the vertices on the horizontal side at 100. and I've been making the vertices on the vertical 100. So once again, 100 times 100 times 2, that's going to give us 20,000 faces per each zone. Still under the 64,000, which is good. And then for the triangle size, this is where quants come into play. I've been using a 50 quants per polygon, which allows me to make a quick calculation. So if we have 100 vertices going across the top and 100 vertices going across the horizontal or the vertical, all we have to do is just do 100 times 50, and that's going to give us approximately 5,000. So when I do the entity create into the 3D Game Studio engine, the first zone is going to be on, let's just say, x equals 0, y equals 0, z equals whatever for the height. When I go to import the next one, after I go through this process again on zone 2, I'm going to import it, and I'm going to start its x and y coordinates at x equals 5,000, y equals 5,000. And now it kind of, well, not y equals 5,000. If we're going across in a straight type of line on the bottom, we're going to do like x equals 5,000, y equals 0, because we're just moving it over 5,000 quants. And now all I have to do is create a little function to correct the height of that terrain. And now if you look at it from a player standpoint, if everything is lined up correctly, then it looks like it's just one huge terrain. But really it's two separate zones, and each separate zone has 20,000 faces, which gives us more detail overall, rather than just exporting as a single height map for the entire world. I've done the export for the entire world as a single height map, and it just looks very, very bad, very choppy. It's like you take your terrain, you stretch it out, and it looks like squares everywhere. So here's my method of doing this, and this is how we're going to be creating our world here. So I do have this set up right now. I've been working on this this world. I'll show you what I have. All right, let me look at this. Okay, here's the zone I have now. Let's see, go to edit, and I'll show you the 3D version of it. Here's the height map that will be exported, but each one's going to have its own little zone. Like I said, this one's going to be a 16 by 16. That looks pretty neat. And also, too, I'm not sure if this will show up here. No. You always got to have a Skull Island. Oh, I think that's it there. I'm not sure. It's in there in the mess somewhere, but I made a Skull Island. Yeah, so cliche. But anyway, Alright, so here's the 3D version of this world here. Let's stretch this out so you can have a better image. Okay, zoom up. Here's going to be the 16 by 16 world in the first zone. It's going to be very basic. It's going to have a few mountains, going to have a lot of water, and I show the water here. There's the water level. And this is what we're going to have, a bunch of islands. And, you know, on each world, or I'm sorry, each zone, it's going to be a total of 56 zones. It's going to add up to create this entire section. But like I said, this is only section 1 out of 36 that PNP Terrain Creator can create. Keep in mind, too, in the 3D Game Studio engine, when working with the X, Y, and Z axis, you cannot exceed, I think it's about 1 million quants. So what we're talking about here is, zone 1 is going to be on X equals 0, Y equals 0. Zone 2 is going to be X equals 5,000, Y equals 0. Zone 3 is going to be on X equals 10,000, Y equals 0. And this is kind of like what I was showing you here. So each one's going to be broken down, and it's going to just be lined up next to each other, and the height's going to be kind of perfected to match, and that's going to have to be a manual type of function here. But that's kind of like what I'm working on here now. When it's all said and done and the player is actually playing, you don't want to be loading 256 zones into the entire world. So my idea here is kind of like what I've been doing with the Owl Palm system. So let me just create a quick terrain here, or a layout to show you what I mean. Okay, so if the player is in this quadrant here, he doesn't really need to see these here. So these can be either a low rendering terrain zone, or they don't have to be loaded at all, because the distance between here and here is going to be 5,000 times 5, or 5,000 plus 5,000 plus 5,000, with 15,000 quants. That's a good size or a good distance. The player's really not going to want to see beyond that. So all the other zones out here aren't going to be loaded until the player moves from here over to here. And once he loads here, these zones here now, or I'm sorry, these zones here will load, and if there's more zones over here, they will unload or not be visible, which will save the client machine some resources to do whatever else in the terrain. Also, too, with this zone system, I have it broken down so, say, like the foliage of the trees on these other zones, they're not going to be rendered unless the player is actually in that zone or around it. So let's just say right now the player's in this zone that I'm putting an X on. The trees and all the other items or whatever we want to add, in the current system I'm using, the trees will load in these zones around the player and on the player's zone. And when he moves from here over to here, these zones unload and these zones load the foliage. And that way we can save some resources. Now, as for terraforming, I have it so whatever zone the player's on is the one that gets the updated terraform information. Once he gets the initial zone loaded with the terraform information, any other changes are going to come in one at a time as the player is in the game, and he's going to update it as that information comes in. But as for initialization, if this place over here, if this zone over here is being terraformed by another player, and this player over here is in this zone where the X is at, he's not going to get the information until he was actually there. But if he was there and he hasn't closed his game, the player over here that terraforms is only sending a small vector. That small vector is going to get sent to this player here just so he knows that he can keep this zone updated. So it's not really a big deal. It's very little information. We're talking about bytes here. So that's not an issue. With the foliage I have now in these 9 zones, we're working approximately about 20,000 some variables in an array, and with the ANET plugin, it's not really going to consume much bandwidth. Actually, it's fairly quick. It sends it within a matter of a second or two. So the loading between zone to zone is going to be kept to a minimal, and that's how we're going to kind of keep going on with this. And like I said, we can go up to 1 million quants, X and Y and Z. So with these, I mean, you take just a real quick calculation, 1 million divided by 5,000 for each zone. We can do a 200 by 200 type of layout. So 200 by 200 is going to be pretty big. I would say it's going to maybe at least take an hour or two to get across from one side to another, especially with the terrain that we have. If it was flat, of course, it would be quicker, but with the mountains and everything, it's going to be a playable type of world. So 200 by 200 is pretty darn good. And if you estimate it'll take like maybe 3 minutes or so to cross each one. You take 3 times 200. It comes out to about 600 minutes divided by 60. Hold on 1 second. I multiplied that by 60. 10 hours. Okay, well, I guess 10 hours or so total to cross from one side of the world to the other, if each zone will be 3 minutes. So that's what we're working with here. So hopefully you can kind of grasp what I was trying to show you, rather than using the WED interface. WED will be good for games that are very small for at least sections, and if it's a single-player game, because a single player can run from level to level and keep loading them up. But with a multiplayer game, we're not going to be doing any level type of systems. I mean, we can later on work it into different servers, which is not a problem, but for now I want to kind of keep this simple. Another thing, too, is that the ANET plugin that I'm using will support up to 2,000 global entities for all players. So right now, our limitations, at least for players, is we cannot exceed 2,000 world entities such as each player. So like 2,000 players per server. So we'll have to break it down to multiple servers if we want any more than 2,000 active players. There's going to be some other things that are world players, maybe special items, special people, things that we have to make sure that every player knows where it's at. Other than that, we're going to be putting it into a MySQL database. Excuse me. I got some burping to do here. But the MySQL database, let me show you what I have. You're familiar with the MySQL database, I'm sure. So I'm using the one plugin that I did find. Not Cheat Engine. There. I'm using the WAMP server for the MySQL database and the PHP. So now it's loaded. And for the Owl Palm that I'm working with right now, I'll show you what I have in at least the database. Alright, so I have like accounts, attributes, banned IPs, banned users, friend list. You can kind of see the list here. And then for every zone, I have the foliage information. And you'll see that some of these zones hold up to 305 records. And you can see that here. If I click on this, you'll see that this is a single tree. It's going to give the position, X and Y. It's going to give the age of the tree, the health of the tree, and what subtype it is. 21 means in zone 21. So there's really 6 types of numbers where we'll have to deal with each tree. And you'll see that I have like 300 some in each zone. So this is really not going to affect us. The server is going to have complete control of the MySQL database. Whenever a player needs information, it's going to request it from the server. Server will either already have it loaded into the memory and send it out immediately, or it's going to load it from the MySQL database and then send it out to the player. That way the player, no matter what he does, he's not going to be able to hack the system because he has to go through the server first. And on the server side, we'll have to make some precautions to allow that safety, or at least the backup protection. So this is what I have for what I'm trying to do right now with the world. If you have any questions, let me know, and I think that this is going to work out fairly well. So, all right, thanks.